New Testament. We've done biblical interpretation. We've done Old Testament, and now we're into New Testament. And so here's what I would love for us to do. This textbook is fantastic. And I'm excited to kind of progress through it with y'all. It's a great resource. We are not going to be able to touch all of it simply because it's quite long and we only have 8 weeks. This is kind of the rhythm. So my encouragement to you is, obviously read what's assigned each week, but then maybe mark the things that haven't been assigned or things that interest you in particular, and go back and kind of reread those or read those for the first time even maybe. But here's what I want to try to accomplish in the next 8 weeks. When we studied the Old Testament, a lot of us at least kind of maybe feel more familiar or more comfortable with the New Testament, right? We're like, this is where I like to be. Like, this feels more comfortable. I know at least one of you in this room, at one point, I was in a Bible study with you, and you told me that you didn't really like the Old Testament. I hope that's changed. I'm not going to say any names. But anyways, when we come to the New Testament, sometimes we feel like, this is a little more comfortable. Like, come on in, the water's great. Like, we feel more at home in the New Testament sometimes than we do in the Old Testament. Not everyone feels that way, but maybe the church writ large probably feels more comfortable with the New Testament than the Old Testament. Think about the amount of sermons you've heard. You've probably heard more New Testament sermons than Old Testament sermons. Maybe not, but more than likely that's the case. So what happens sometimes when we study the Old Testament, or when we get in a group like this and we're going to do like a survey of the Old Testament or something, we come to the Old Testament certainly with preconceived notions, right? Preconceived ideas, thoughts about the stories therein, all that stuff, right? But my concern is that we come with a whole lot more of those when we come to the New Testament, because we spent more time in it and we think we have a better grasp of it. Sometimes we do. We've heard more stories from it. We've heard more sermons from it. We've done more Bible studies from books that are in it and those types of things. So my concern, but also my prayer for us, is that my concern is that we bring a lot more baggage to the New Testament in some ways, different types of baggage even, than we do to the Old Testament. So we're going to have to remember what we did, back almost, 16 plus weeks ago-ish, when we did biblical interpretation, and we learned, hey, we all are bringing our own unique lenses and glasses and experiences and baggage and interpretations and the way you grew up, and if you were in church growing up or not, and your family, all that stuff, if you're man or woman, your race, all those things get kind of flooded into us when we approach the Bible, and that's the lenses through which we see it. And so we come, I think, with even more baggage to the New Testament sometimes. So anyways, we're going to bear in mind that we're going to have to sometimes kind of take some of those glasses off and set them aside, and hopefully and prayerfully encounter it anew and see things that maybe we didn't see in the past. Maybe we need to unlearn some things. And let me tell y'all, as someone who's had to do this multiple times in my life, unlearning is much harder than learning. Unlearning is much harder than learning something. So you have to break down something that you've held forever in your heart, or that you've kind of just mentally ascribed to, and have to break that down is often much harder than actually learning something new or something that you haven't been exposed to yet. So anyways, with all of that said, what I want to do tonight is mostly talk about the intertestamental period. So what actually happened between the Old Testament and the New Testament? Where are we in history? What is happening? Who were some of the main players? Why, when we get to the New Testament, are things the way they are? Where did Rome come from? Why are they in power now? When we left off in the book of Malachi, Israel had just kind of begun to return from being, in captivity. You have, Babylon and Syria and Persia and Greece, and you have all those. You have Greece in the middle of the intertestamental period, and all this stuff is happening. So how do we get to the New Testament? Who are the main players? What is going on in global history? Because here's what normally happens. Here's what happens, and I don't think this is anyone's fault. I would love it to be, because I would love to be able to assign blame to someone. But I think this is just how we've collectively learned and taught history classes. And part of this is because, especially if you're in public school, stuff about the Bible's not going to seep in there into your history class, which it doesn't need to necessarily. If it's world history, like, you can learn world history and that'd be okay. But what we don't understand, because of how many of us have learned history, are things like this. And we're going to talk more about this in a second. The Iliad and the Odyssey, Homer's great great epics. If Homer actually existed, we don't know if he did or not. That's beside the point. But the Iliad and the Odyssey were actually written down way before Jesus. Way before Jesus. People like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, way before Jesus. And because how many of us learned world history, in our brains, we're like, okay, the New Testament ends, we close the book, and then the rest of our world history textbooks begin. And that's simply not the case, right? World history is exploding around the events of the New Testament. And so what we're going to do tonight is talk about the intertestamental period, which is a fancy way of saying what happens between the Old and the New Testament, okay? So to that end, what we're going to do is we're going to draw ourselves a little diagram. And I'm going to connect back there real quick once I get this set up. Give me just a second. Sometimes it takes a while to see. There it is. I'm going to get this connected for us. And we're just going to kind of do a little bit of a timeline, do a little bit of understanding and kind of maybe putting some major world events. Abel, can you yell that code to me?
0972.
972. Thank you. But we're going to try to kind of get some major hooks where we can hang the rest of world history on and hang the other events of the Bible around what's happening between the Old and New Testament. Okay, so that's kind of tonight's plan. We're not so much actually going to start studying the New Testament yet, but in order to understand what's happening in the New Testament, we really, really, really need to understand how we got there. Okay, so that's what we're going to do tonight, and that is the plan. So. And we're going to see how my system works here, being able to actually draw for you how we do this. So here's what we're going to do. Again, like I said, we have things that happened before before Jesus, before the New Testament. The New Testament is even composed or begun or anything like that. So here's what we're going to do. It starts with things like, again, you have the Iliad, you have the Odyssey. You have Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And these people right here, they run the gamut of around 470 to about 322-ish BCE. So again, way before Jesus, way before Rome is in power. This is all predating. So this is stuff before that's happening in the world. So when you begin to study the New Testament, Greek philosophy is actually a huge, huge component, especially in the letters of Paul. Paul does a lot of philosophizing as a Greek scholar with a Greek mind would have done, because all of these people predated him, and now history and scholarship and things like that have become tied up in the systems that these three men put in place and began philosophically to talk about and to ponder and to wonder about. So this is why a lot of the philosophy is done the way it is, a lot of even the arguments and the Socratic dialogue is done the way it is, because this all predates the New Testament. Okay, so another thing that we need to really, really, really be hugely aware of is that in the 4th century, and again, this is BCE, so BC, but this is before Jesus, this is before the Common Era, you have a guy by the name of Alexander the Great. And he's a really, really big deal for a lot of reasons. One, he conquered basically all of the known world at the time, as much as was possible for him to conquer. And he began, and then the generals that took over after him, that we'll talk about in a second, began the process of Hellenization, which is basically making everything Greek, which is really, really important. Why is the New Testament written in Greek? Because of Alexander the Great and all the things he did and the people who came after him. That's why. So Alexander the Great is Greek. So this is where we get a lot of the reasons that we have Greek mythology. We have the language of Greek. We have Greek culture and Greek experiences and Greek religion and all those things. It's because Alexander the Great began this massive, massive empire, and then he died. And he died in around 323 BCE. And this is why this is important. One, I need us to realize that these other massive world events are happening between the Old and New Testament, but also continue to happen into the context of the New Testament. So the Bible, the events of the Bible aren't just happening in a vacuum. And hopefully we've kind of begun to realize that as we've gone through the Old Testament, right? But the events of the Bible are not just happening in a vacuum. World history is exploding around the events of the Bible. There is stuff happening in southern Africa that we're not even going to be able to touch on. There's stuff happening in China with multiple dynasties at this point. World history is happening, okay? It's not just like, only the events of the Bible, that's all the world history happening. No. It is exploding just right, left, north, south, east, west, all over the world at this time. So Alexander the Great, he dies in about 323, and then, why can I not write anymore? There we go. He dies in 323 BCE. Now, he dies suddenly, and his generals, his major military leaders, are all kind of like, well, crap, what are we going to do? There's like this massive power vacuum, right? And power abhors a vacuum. So his generals all begin to, and there's some familial drama happening in here at the same time, but all of his generals begin to kind of jockey for position. And he had conquered so much of the world. There was so much land, there was so much space for them to occupy and to maintain that he has 4 to 5 generals plus a family member. It kind of, scholars are a little bit divided on how much power some of the ones later on down the line had, but there's 2 that we really, really need to focus on to understand the events of the Bible. Okay, here we go. You ready? I'm going to do these in red so you can actually see them and we can come back to them. You have General Seleucus, and some of you are going, this isn't the New Testament. This isn't what I signed up for. You have Seleucus, and then does anyone know the other one that I'm going to talk about? No one. It's fine. It's fine. Ptolemy. Guys, you got to be bold. Say it and believe it with your spirit. Don't be afraid. Ptolemy. Okay, so Seleucus becomes the Seleucid Empire, which you read about in your book this week. The Seleucid Empire. And then Ptolemy equals the Ptolemies. Imagine that. They were really original with their names. Now, does anyone want to be bold and actually have confidence in yourself tonight? Where did the Ptolemies rule and reign? Where did Egypt, there we go. So the Ptolemy goes down to Egypt and sets up his own little kind of camp, and then his family and his kind of lineage and the people who went with him become the Ptolemies, and they become incredibly powerful in Egypt, okay? Incredibly powerful in Egypt. So let me tell you a few things about the Ptolemies before we move over to the Seleucids. The Ptolemies do some really great things. Ptolemy, the main guy in particular, was a little bit of a shifty character. And he he stole Alexander the Great's body. He stole Alexander's body. Anyone want to take a wild guess where he put it? Alexandria. Alexander the Great in Egypt, Alexandria. History's wild, y'all. Alexandria. Now, what do we know about Alexandria? Library. Y'all, let me tell you something. It pains my spirit that library burned. Like, I can't really think about it. Like, it makes me so sad that library burned, because there were scrolls and information there that would have been incredibly helpful to have, and it was also apparently, like, magnificent. So yeah, Alexandria becomes this great capital-type city where the Ptolemies established rule. You have the Library of Alexandria. You have these great, like, architectural things being developed. All of this is happening in Alexandria, named after Alexander the Great, also where Ptolemy stole his body and put it, okay? Now, does anyone want to take a stab at when did the Ptolemies kind of finally just fall off the map? Like, who was the last main person from this line that we know of, or that we have before they became, like, overthrown? It's a woman, I'll give you that. Cleopatra. Yeah, Cleopatra. So down this line of genealogy, a good bit of ways, some centuries later, you have Cleopatra. Crazy how history works, y'all. You have Cleopatra, and with her comes the crashing down of the Ptolemies, of the Ptolemaic Empire, because she had some issues. She had some issues. You can read all about it in Antony and Cleopatra by William Shakespeare, where he just very dramatically tells the tale of how she falls in love with a certain Roman official, and they have this whole situation, and it's just bad, y'all. It ends in tragedy. It's not good. But again, that's not why we're here. But you should go read Antony and Cleopatra by William Shakespeare. It actually gives you some interesting information. So yeah, then the Ptolemies end after Cleopatra. Like that's them done. But this whole time, they're kind of at war with the Seleucids. The Seleucids are kind of at war with them. Rome obviously is kind of beginning to march in, especially towards the end there where Cleopatra is the last one and then she's gone. So Rome is starting to edge in at this point. So that's the Ptolemaic side. That's what's happening in the Egyptian area that still has really big ramifications for the Bible because they are constantly at war with the Seleucids. The Seleucids are constantly at war with them amongst other people groups and amongst other nations and such. So this is the backdrop of how we are about to explode into the New Testament, okay? But before we can do that, we need to talk about the Seleucids because they are major, major players in how we end up in the beginning of the Gospels, okay? So for the Seleucids, again, so where the Ptolemies were Egypt, does anyone want to take a stab at remembering or telling me where were the Seleucids kind of? What's the main capital kind of major area? Syria. So they were in Syria. You guys are rocking and rolling tonight. This is great. Okay, so the Seleucids set up shop. You have several rulers kind of just maintaining status quo, trying to grow their empire again. There's some infighting, as there always is, because there's been factions. Remember, Alexander the Great's generals split in kind of this really aggressive way. There's infighting. There's wars happening. Even people within the Seleucid family are trying to fight each other because they want to be in power. Same with the Ptolemies, all that stuff, right? But the Seleucid Empire takes place mostly in Syria. And eventually, down the line of the Seleucid Empire, we get this one particular ruler who's just a really bad apple, like a really, really, really bad apple. And he is a guy, Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth, which means that there were more than one. That's a clever way in history of saying there were others before him. So he's a bad guy. He's a bad apple. He wants to be in power. He craves power, as most rulers do. And he decides, I'm going to begin to expand my empire, and I'm going to go up to the Judean area, to kind of where the Israelites were kind of camped out. The Jews were kind of there. I'm going to go begin to take their land because I'm a ruler, and that's what rulers do, right? They see a place that they want, and they say, I'm stronger than you, I will take it. That's world history in a nutshell. So he does this really, really bad thing. And does anyone know, so he basically, he desecrates the temple. So he goes into Jerusalem, he erects an altar to Zeus in the temple, sacrifices a pig on the altar, which is the ultimate no-no. Literally the two ultimate no-nos, where there's a third that we're going to get to that someone else does later on. But Antiochus Epiphanes IV marches into Jerusalem, marches into the temple, desecrates it in almost every way possible, sacrifices a pig, and erects an altar to Zeus there. Do you know the date? You don't even have to give me the year. December 25th, yes. So he does this on December 25th. Now, do you know the year? 167. 167 BCE. Again, before Jesus. This is happening before the events of the New Testament. So this, on December 25th, 167, he desecrates the temple. In Jerusalem. Well, we're getting there. So anyways, do you all know what happens exactly 3 years after that? Exactly 3 years after that, so December 25th, 3 years later, you get this guy by the name of Judas Maccabeus. Judas Maccabeus. who comes from the Maccabean family. Maccabeus. And this is where Hanukkah comes from, because what he does is he leads an uprising of Jews against the Seleucid Empire and says, no more, not having you here. And he goes in and he cleanses the temple. And this is also where we get the celebration of Hanukkah. Now, if you remember when we talked in our first session, our first 8 weeks, I held up some different Bibles and said, this Bible is the one that we have in front of us, and it has our 66 books in it. And then this other Bible has a lot more books in it. There are books in that other Bible about this. First and Second Maccabees. They literally tell you all the historical events that happened during this uprising, during the Maccabean revolt, information from the Maccabean family. There's also just other things in there about them beginning as a people to understand that the Jews really get caught in a conundrum, because what happens is at the end of the Old Testament, they're out of captivity. They're not in exile anymore, right? They're beginning to come home. You have Nehemiah and Ezra. Ezra's trying to restore the temple. Nehemiah's trying to restore the wall. They kind of get to a place where they're able to return back to somewhat of a normal life, and yet they realize something is still not right. Like, we've built a new temple, but it's not filled with the Spirit of God. So that's a problem. We also don't have a ruler. We don't have a Davidic king. So that's a problem. So we're kind of like halfway there, living on a prayer. Like, it's not good. But we're halfway there, right? And so they're beginning to understand something needs to happen. We're kind of caught in this conundrum. And then this event happens. So, a couple centuries removed from that. And then finally, they have this Maccabean family begin to revolt against their oppressors. They have new oppressors now. And Judas Maccabeus and his father and some of his brothers and whoever revolt. And so then Israel's like, okay, we have our temple, still not filled with the Spirit of God, but okay, we got our temple. We actually have a family that's showing great promise in leadership, both spiritually and in military might. This is good. Maybe they can rule us. And yet there's still something missing, right? It's still not completely okay, because what eventually happens is the Maccabean family, just also FYI, just so you know, the Maccabees equal the Hasmoneans. So you'll see both of those names. The Hasmonean comes from one of their ancestors' name. So that's why the Hasmonean dynasty, the Maccabees, it's the same name. But history is weird. So anyways, the Hasmoneans actually achieve independence. They actually achieve some type of political independence. And the Hasmoneans rule in Judea, in Israel, Jerusalem, for a while. They actually have a decent line. They make a good run of it. But again, you begin having some infighting. You begin having some bad situations with their family. Doesn't quite work out. And so by the end of that dynasty, it's a little shaky, not super great in some ways. And of course, this leads to the ability for Rome to come in. Because Rome is gaining power in the background. Rome is overthrowing the Ptolemaic Empire. Rome is kind of just on the march, moving. And they come to the Judean area. They come to the area where the Jews are dwelling. And about 63 BCE, you actually have Romans in Judea. And that's not good. Because what happens after that is, you remember how I told you when Antiochus Epiphanes IV marches in the temple, he does two really bad things. He erects an altar to Zeus, and he sacrifices a pig. Two really bad things. Well, you have this guy by the name of Pompey who decides to also desecrate the temple. And he does it by going into the Holy of Holies, which again, We'll do questions in a minute. Write your questions down. So what's happening here is, again, Israel is in a conundrum. Because what they've been promised, or what they perceive to have been promised, especially in the Old Testament, when the prophets are talking about what it's going to look like when God reigns and when Israel is given its rightful place and when their oppressors are crushed, which they think has happened because they're not in captivity anymore at the end of the Old Testament, but they begin to realize we're still in a conundrum. Because what's just happened is we've been overthrown yet again, and our temple has been desecrated yet again, and a human being, not a high priest, has just marched his way right into the Holy of Holies with no consequences. Do you understand like the amount of confusion that would leave for them? To have a human being who is not a high priest, who's not supposed to be in there at any point in time, who's not even a Jewish person, march right into the Holy of Holies after just a few centuries before someone had sacrificed a pig and erected an altar to Zeus, and there seems to be no ramifications for this. So Israel is in a conundrum, theologically, kind of socially. How do we reckon with this? How do we come to terms with this being our reality? So there is incredible tension that's building up within the people of Israel. If we didn't have enough tension in the Old Testament, we sure have tension now. Because once again, they are going to be kind of almost a vassal state for a while of Rome. So you have Pompey come in, he desecrates the temple, and then what he begins to do is he appoints the high priests. Now, for a while, you had the Hasmoneans or the Maccabean family who kind of acted in some capacities as priests and kings, which isn't really supposed to happen. They're not supposed to be the same people. That's why in the Old Testament, you have the kingly line and you have the tribe of Levi, who they're supposed to be the priests. Now, the Hasmoneans, pretty sure they're actually Levites, but still, you're not supposed to have them mix and mingle in the same person, right? So there's already corruption in the temple at this point. It was bad news bears. But when you have a foreign leader come in and exert control and desecrate the temple, and he's like, I'm going to appoint high priests who are kind of going to do what I want to do and not really let you stay like completely loyal to your God, not really going to do that. It just goes super downhill from there. So in the midst of all of what we've just talked about, you also have Hellenization that started back with Alexander the Great, continuing to be so powerful and creep in amongst the Jews and amongst every other people group that Alexander the Great and his generals were overpowering, that you have certain Jews who begin to kind of assimilate into Hellenization, and they begin to kind of lose some of their Jewishness, their identity as Jews. They begin to assimilate into Hellenization. Then you have other groups and factions of Jews who kind of split off and go into basically seclusion, like full-out seclusion, where they're like living as nomads, basically, like in the desert, like just away from civilization, with the point and with the hope of remaining quote-unquote pure or true. And then you have Jews who kind of are staying in Jerusalem and staying in Judea who are caught in the middle somewhere, right? So you have these different factions. You have the Jewish population being split amongst multiple different tensions. They're being pulled in different directions. And it's really, really frustrating and really difficult in the midst of all this. Now, once again, Hellenization is important because this is also, again, like I said earlier, this is why the New Testament is written in Greek. This is during this period of time is where we get the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, right? I think we talked about that back when we were doing biblical interpretation. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the New Testament. And one of the reasons that they did that was because the Greek rulers and the people in power were like, hey, let's get that document translated so we have it, and probably copies of it in the Library of Alexandria. But also because Jews were losing their ability to speak their language. Hebrew was kind of dying out. And so you had many more Jews who knew Greek or who knew Aramaic than you had Jews who actually knew Hebrew. So most people who were kind of just common people, Jesus spoke Aramaic. Jesus didn't speak Greek. He and those people were speaking Aramaic, but the more learned people, the people who were writing these things down, think of like Luke, who was a doctor, they would write in Greek because it was the common kind of language of the people, of things that you wrote things down in. because that's just what the masses, the people who were able to read, they're like, Greek is better, let's do that. So in the midst of all this, you have not only political tension, not only religious tension, but you have almost this like nationalistic tension that the Jews at the time are experiencing, once again, finding themselves in a pretty big conundrum. Like, what do we do? Who are we as people? Where is our God? He seems to be pretty silent, seems to not be doing very much. We've watched our temple be desecrated twice now with no consequences that we can see, really. So what's going on? So again, Pompey comes in, appoints his own high priests, and then it's really, really continues to be downhill from there. Now, we're inching closer and closer and closer to the opening of the Gospels, because what happens in the midst of all of this, you get Pompey coming in, and then this is where you get the Herodian dynasty. You get the Herodian dynasty during this period. The big one that we need to know about, just to kind of get ourselves set, is Herod the Great. And he's kind of in power 40 BCE to about 4 BCE-ish. And so Herod the Great, I just didn't put the T on Greek, there we go. Herod the Great comes to kind of power, but he's a puppet for Rome, basically. They're kind of a vassal state. He's put there. They're a Jewish family. They have Jewish origins, but they came to be very hated by the Jews, understandably so. They were a terrible family, lots of infighting, lots of incest, lots of really bad things happening there that are just really unpleasant to hear about. And the Herodian dynasty was used and acted as basically puppets for Rome for a few generations. There's a few different major Herodian leaders that we read about even in the New Testament. Now, here's how we kind of get to where we get in like Matthew 1, Luke 1, that area. So Herod the Great, let's do this over here. Mark Antony was his patron. So he worked for Mark Antony. Now, again, Antony and Cleopatra. Now, you remember with me, Cleopatra was the end of the Ptolemies. So when that falls, like, she's with Rome now, basically. The Ptolemies are done with. You have Mark Antony, who's kind of assuming power because, if you remember with me, Julius Caesar died on March 15th, 44 BCE. So you have the death of Julius Caesar up here. Sorry, my handwriting's just really bad. I apologize. But he dies, and it's just bad news bears, because it just, again, you have this uprising. The Senate overthrows him. He's assassinated on the Ides of March. So, anyways, you're left with Mark Antony, because Antony kind of comes up to power after that, after some wars happen. So Mark Antony was Herod the Great's patron. Now, here's what happens here, because again, you have a lot of infighting, you have a lot of power struggles, you have a lot of people jockeying for position. There's a guy by the name of Octavian, and he's also known by another name. He's also known as Caesar Augustus. Not quite yet, but yeah, he's the same guy. So if you see Octavian, that equals Caesar Augustus. And Octavian overthrows Antony. So that means that Herod is now loyal to Octavian. And this is where the New Testament starts. This is why when you open up the New Testament, and when you read the opening chapters, especially when you get to the Gospel of like Luke chapter 2, where it says this: in those days, Caesar Augustus, Octavian, issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. That's how we've gotten here. This didn't just happen. Like, it didn't just like, poof, oh, all of a sudden Rome's in power. Okay. No, This is why. This is why. All of the stuff we've just talked about leading up to this, all the way back to Alexander the Great. And there's way more stuff happening in the intertestamental period than I can cover right now. But this kind of gives you a little bit of a backbone of saying, oh, that's how Rome came to power. That's how the Herodian dynasty operated. They were not great people. The Herodian dynasty was full of just really, really messed up people who did really, really nasty things, but they were loyal to and basically puppets of Rome. So when Herod, is offended, and when Herod is concerned enough to institute the massacre of the innocents, when all the male children are killed in the Gospels at the birth of Jesus, he's insecure because he's not really in charge. He's really not in charge. He's already underneath the power of Rome, so he's already dealing with some major insecurities, plus probably, according to historians, some psychological issues as well. But some major, major insecurities because he's not really in power. And even the people who are really in power are also afraid. But Herod's already dancing on a very, very, on very thin ice with his perceived power. So when he hears that there's this new king in town, he gets even more concerned because he's not really in control. He's acting as a vassal state. They're acting as puppets for Rome. And then you have Caesar Augustus who's in power. And if you look at your textbook, let's see here. What page was it? It's like in 70s or 80s, I think. Let's see here. Yeah, so there's a few things in your textbook I want to point out that will help you highlight and see this laid out differently. If you need to see it in a different timeline, if you need to see it in family trees, let me point out a few pages to you. Now that we have this backbone, you can now associate it with specific pages in your book. Page 87 in the right hand, you get a timeline of the Persian and Greek period. So you see Babylonian, Persian, Greek. You notice kind of about halfway down, 323, Alexander dies. His empire is divided. That's where we get the Ptolemies and the Seleucids that we just talked about. So that's kind of laid out a little differently. If you need to see it differently, it's there for you, kind of compact. Let me read this because I want to read this and get it in our brains a little deeper as we get ready to jump off into the rest of the New Testament. On page 88, the first full paragraph that we've talked a little bit about tonight says this: the story of the Judean exiles' return is recounted in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and in the prophetic books of Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, and Daniel. This post-exilic period includes Ezra's religious reforms and Nehemiah's eventual rebuilding of the temple and the city wall. But although the Judeans were now back in the land, remember the land is a big deal with the covenant, so that they're, again, halfway there living on a prayer. They're in the land. The full glorious sweep of prophetic promises about Israel's restoration had not yet materialized. And then it says, see box. Israel's post-exilic restoration hopes. That's that little tan box there. Note that they're quoting from the book of Tobit, which is in the Apocrypha. So you should read the Apocrypha because it has really good, helpful historical information. Anyways, continuing on. The 12 tribes had not yet been completely regathered. There was no new Davidic king. The rebuilt temple was a pale comparison with Solomon's original temple. The glorious divine presence had not yet returned. The nations were not swarming to Zion to worship God, and unrighteousness still abounded. Instead of living under the reign of God, the Jews found themselves living under the power of one pagan kingdom after another. The effects of the exile still lingered, and things were about to get a whole lot worse. Again, there's tension. There's incredible, incredible tension that is happening as we encounter the beginnings of the New Testament. Page 92 gives you a family tree of the Hasmonean dynasty or the Maccabees. Gives you, again, some of these names we're never going to talk about in this group. If you want to do a deep dive historical study, go for it. You have my full approval. But again, just pointing out some things so that you can tie them to pages in your book about what we just talked about. Again, on page 93, in that little tan box, the authors here quote from Second Maccabees, where Judas Maccabeus rededicates the temple. Again, you should read the Apocrypha. Great stuff is happening in there. Page 97 at the bottom, you get Herod's family tree. This is actually not my most favorite version of his family tree, but this is how they decided to do it. You get a lot of infighting in this family. You get a lot of problems because one of these fine young gentlemen here decides that he's going to get divorced and he's going to marry his brother's wife, right? This is what we have the story in Mark where you get Salome, who's the bottom left there. She's the daughter of Herodias, who is a woman who was initially married to Herod Agrippa. And then Herod Antipas, over there on the right, he decides that he wants to divorce Archelaus and marry his brother's wife, Herodias. So not only is Herod the Great Herodias' kind of uncle-ish, but he's also Salome's like great uncle. It's a weird family situations are happening that then led to some severe psychological and biological problems that ultimately led to several empires' downfall. Was inbreeding and incest and just really, really bad things. But you can read about specific people from this family in those Bible references that are there. But the Herodian dynasty extends even in the book of Acts. We get accounts of them. Big, big family that you should be aware of. I think there's one other page that I had earmarked here. Yes, page 106 and 107. On the two columns there on either side, you get the chronology of the Roman emperors, and I think they even include the prefects. Yes, they do. So you see that the first one there is Augustus, Caesar Augustus, or Octavian. So this is really where the New Testament begins to jump off, is when he comes to power. Julius Caesar is dead, Mark Antony is out of the picture, and now we have these people. So then you get Tiberius. Some of these big ones will ring familiar to you. Nero on the top of page 107. At the end of Nero, that's where we get in 70 AD, the destruction of the Second Temple, which is a huge thing that we will talk more about as we get into the actual meat of the New Testament. And then, of course, the emperors continue on well into early 100s AD. So, anyways, there's a lot happening in the course of history that sets up the backbone and the backdrop of why when we open the book of Luke, it says, in the days of Caesar Augustus. It's not that Caesar Augustus just kind of like waltzed on the scene and was like, well, here I am. Worship me. Pay homage to me. I'm in charge now. No, there's a arc of history happening. But again, two things I really want to emphasize, and then we'll do questions and some discussion. Two things I really want to emphasize. One, world history is happening both behind the text and in the text of the Bible. Especially in the New Testament, because we have the ability to do a lot more dating and to do a lot more historical research, because we have more documents. We have more surviving artifacts. We have more surviving historical information from this time period from other cultures, right? But there's history happening around and in and producing the events of the New Testament, right? So that's one thing that I really want us to kind of get our arms around. The other thing is to emphasize and really play up, and you don't really even need to play it up because it's very clear that it's there, the tension that we really come to in the beginning of the New Testament. We often we often express our concept of the tension by recognizing, yes, there's 400 years of silence between Malachi and the beginning of the New Testament. And to us, we're like, that's tension enough. Like, that's like tension, right? Yes, that's tension, but there's way more built up on top of that. Because not only is God not saying anything, or they're not perceiving God to say anything, we have no record of God speaking to God's people for 400 years. Not only is God not speaking, but atrocities are mounting in God's silence. Again, you have people sacking the temple. You have people desecrating the holy places. Again, with no perceived consequences. God's people are kind of back in the land, but there's no Davidic king. The temple hasn't really been living up to our expectations of what it's going to be. And it's just not really, it's ringing hollow in a lot of ways. And the tension continues to build and to build and to build. And so that is where we open the pages of the New Testament. Tension, a perceived heavy absence of God, under foreign rule yet again, with no end in sight for help or restoration or for anything they've heard about in the Old Testament to actually come true. And so that's where we're at. Let's do questions, comments, and things, and then we can talk a little bit about your handout, which gives some helpful information to kind of support some of this. So there's microphones, I think, here and somewhere else, so make sure that those get turned on. And we will begin doing some comments and questions. Someone find a microphone. Yeah.
So you talked about the temple being desecrated, but that the Spirit of the Lord had not returned to the temple?
It never went back. The Spirit of the Lord never fills the second temple.
And does that mean that the Ark of the Covenant is not there? Like, how
the
exactly?
The Ark was lost in the Old Testament. Like, the Ark is not in the second temple. It's gone. But the Ark isn't really...
But the second temple's in the Old Testament, so before the second temple, the Ark is lost.
It's gone. Yeah, but if you read Solomon's dedication of the first temple, there's this huge, massive ceremony that they do, and it's very palpable and tangible that the Spirit of God is there. Like, make no mistake, when the Spirit of God descends on something, you know it. But they do Ezra, and even in the Old Testament, when they build the second temple, and then Herod kind of does some repairs to it, and they try to dedicate it again. The Spirit of God never fills the second temple.
Okay, and then is it desecration if there's nothing in the Holy of Holies?
I mean, it's still the Holy of Holies. Like, I wouldn't go in there. Like, okay. Yes, but in Israel's collective understanding, yes, like that is that's the worst thing you could possibly do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it still was built just without the ark. Like there was no.
Yeah, and they were still doing sacrifices. They were still using it as a temple, but God's Spirit's not there. Huge indication that things are wrong. And things aren't. It's not as glorious as Solomon's temple. It's not as immaculate.
So is there a mercy seat? I mean, if
the mercy seat is the top of the Ark of the Covenant.
So isn't that where the sacrifices went, or where are the sacrifices?
They would have an altar in the outer court.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're just making do as best they can.
And just like pretending.
Yeah.
Like Wizard of Oz.
Was there what?
Like Wizard of Oz, like something.
Yes, exactly. Behind the curtain, there's something there. We won't show you. I thought you said, was there a cross? And I was like, absolutely not. I was like, no, not at all. Still not today would there be one. No, exactly. Yeah. Microphone. Otherwise, people will lose your golden words, Connolly.
So would they have been in practice, even though the Spirit of the Lord wasn't there, but in practice hoping that at some point the Spirit of the Lord would come?
Yeah.
Right. It's
That's
not like
their
they
hope.
knew.
Again, there's tension, right?
Oh.
So they're waiting for God to do something. They're expecting God to show up. Maybe God's messenger will come. Maybe a prophet will come. Maybe someone will come and help us set this right. But yeah, exactly. That's part of the tension. Yeah. What else?
I thought John the Baptist, were they hoping like that John the Baptist, because he's the first prophet, if you will, were they hoping that he would usher in the Spirit of God back to the temple? Like, is that their
It's part of it. I mean, John was a prophet, right? So they had a lot of hopes on John. They also had a lot of hopes on other people who would rise up and they would think was the Messiah. They had a lot of people that they thought was the Messiah, like throughout history. Jesus wasn't the first one who came on and they're like, that's him. No, they had multiple people that they were like, we're going to throw our allegiance behind this guy and hope that maybe, and then he would die, move on to the next one, like just waiting and waiting and waiting. But yeah, they thought that John the Baptist was Elijah come back. They thought that he was going to do something special. They thought he was going to do something miraculous. But then he gets beheaded by one of the Herods because his niece turned wife's daughter, so his great niece, under the influence of her mother, requests the head of John the Baptist on a plate for a birthday gift, basically. And so that's when John the Baptist dies, and that kind of squelches the hopes that John was going to do anything extraordinary.
So when you say there's a tension and they're waiting for something, do they actually have any idea what they're waiting for? Like,
different groups are waiting for different things. So you have some groups who are thinking, if we could just get like a king in here to handle this. Or some groups are thinking, if we could just get the priestly line restored, things would be okay. You have groups that are saying, we need to reform. If we could just de-Hellenize ourselves and become, quote, pure again, things will get better. So you have not only tension in the big picture, but you have tension about how the tension is going to be resolved. Yeah.
I think
this isn't a question, but I just think that's what's so cool about the way you've set this all up. Because it's, and I love that about like some of the dramas that we've grown up with over the years, like my favorite being Jesus of Nazareth, but also my ultimate favorite being Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yeah.
The way the Zealots are portrayed as being, I mean, they are crazy because they have been put through hell, which a lot of people could say our culture is, you know, we are so completely like kind of sectorized because we've been put through all this stuff that we are so angry about, you know, and so about. And I think that that's the way these people were feeling. They're just wanting somebody to change something, and they want. And so the coming of the Savior, it makes so much sense when you see it from a historical background. I just love that, you know.
Yeah, it gives perspective and a lot of help. What else? Thoughts, comments, questions? Yes, I think there's a mic on your table, actually.
So the silent period is not really silent, right? There's a ton going on.
Yeah.
But when the New Testament was put together, was it almost like a conscious decision to kind of skip over everything? Because, as you said, Maccabees and Tobit, there were these other books or other writings that did cover some of the stuff. So the fact that the New Testament starts kind of when things are getting going again, was that kind of a conscious decision?
Sure, great question. The Catholics would say no, because they have those books in their canon, right? I mean, the church writ large, for the most part, had, again, back to what Joey talked about when he talked about how the Bible came to be. Most traditions accepted the Apocrypha in some capacity as authoritative literature, or at least included it maybe at the back of their text for centuries. Martin Luther even did. Martin Luther was like, cool, he put it at the back, but he was like, I'll include it, that's fine. So really not until like thousands of years later did we have this like really intense, like, no, not that. So some traditions don't miss out as much on this intertestamental period if they have books like 1st and 2nd Maccabees, among others. Now, obviously, those books are written from very one-sided. They're written from a very Jewish perspective, right? So you also, they're very religious texts, because a lot of it is about this is God's vindication. This is us taking back the temple. This is us restoring order. But you do get the history of what's happening there. So yeah, again, those books were included for quite some time, but our tradition, we really miss out on a lot because ours just start 400 years later, missing out even on a few decades, or just a few, like even a century before that. But we don't have anything really by way of biblical text like immediately following Malachi. It takes it a while for things like Maccabees to actually happen. But yeah. Anything else? Yes.
I've got a really stupid question.
No such thing. Go for it.
So in the meantime, what's going on in China and India and South America?
Yeah, great. So in China, you begin having the dynasties, so you have, for example, I can't remember the emperor or the dynasty that this happened in, but I'm 99.99% sure that the burying of the terracotta army happened before Jesus. Right? It happened before the New Testament. I'm 99% sure that was like just at the end of I'm pretty sure it was. So anyways, you have dynasties beginning to do their thing. You don't have any of the big players yet. Obviously, like Genghis Khan and stuff was much later. But you have China beginning to be a place ruled by dynasties and ruled by families, and different types of government are being set up there than we have in like Rome, or than we have with the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Different kind of flavors of stuff is happening over there. They kind of extend down into India in some capacities, if I remember correctly. And then, of course, you have stuff happening down in Africa. I mean, Egypt is North Africa, but you have all the space below that. You have other kind of European nations beginning to kind of do some things. But yeah, world history is happening around all of the events of the Old and New Testament. You know, I'm just not, my Chinese history isn't up to par. Any other stuff before we talk about our handout a little bit? Okay, let's talk about the handout, and I'll post this online as well. But again, this is kind of a really good summary. This is the beginning of another New Testament textbook that I've used in the past. But if you look at page 18, which is kind of the first page there of the handout, it breaks down what we just talked about. So again, I'm trying to give you similar information in different ways, because sometimes you need to see it differently, and that will click with you. Maybe my little chart here didn't click with you, but this will. So I'm just trying to get it in our brain. So this page 18 walks through Hellenistic, Hasmonean, the Ptolemies are in there, Roman period, all of this stuff. And then this is really why I printed this off, because it gives you, starting on page 19, some of the main player groups that we will encounter in the New Testament, starting with the Pharisees. So Pharisee isn't just a cute name for someone that we dislike in the New Testament, or, oh, they're such a Pharisee. Like, no, they were an actual group of people, like, right? Like, they were an actual group of people. Like, don't cancel the Pharisees yet before you actually get to know them. The Pharisees were actually a group of people. They were a Jewish sect, and often, as this says, they're really often in the Gospels perceived as Jesus's opponents, or if not his opponents, at least his interlocutors. They kind of go back and forth. And here, let me just kind of read from this. I'm not insulting your intelligence, but we can process this together. It says, the Pharisees emphasized faithfulness to Torah, including study of the Scripture, obedience to the law. They also assigned authoritative status to an oral body of material known as the tradition of the elders. So this is where they begin to add some things to what they perceive to be authoritative, or what they perceive to be something that everyone should obey or listen to. That became codified, which means it became put together and is called the Mishnah, which is part of the Talmud, which we can talk about later. Their interpretations of the law, they are very into holiness. They're very into sanctification of the body, of the person, cleanliness, all of that stuff. And they were very, very concerned with the law, with following the law, keeping the law, making sure that things were properly cared for, making sure that things like hand washing, things like cleanliness. This is why the Pharisees get on to Jesus in the New Testament, and they say, so your disciples just ate some food, but they didn't wash their hands first. Which, first of all, they're not wrong. You should wash your hands. But they're coming at it from a ritualistic purification standpoint, because they so value the law at the expense and the cost of anything else, and they added some things even on top of the law to make sure that the law was kept, right? It was like a security blanket of laws that they put over the law to make sure, right? So they're very, very concerned with the Torah, with the law. It says later on, many Pharisees were the leaders of their synagogues. Some are probably the teachers or the rabbis even. And so anyways, that's the Pharisees, very concerned with holiness, very concerned with the law, adding laws outside of the law to make sure no one gets too close to touching the law. Like they're really trying their best. And again, they get a bad rap, especially in the Gospels, but think about what they're going through. They are attempting to restore some type of holiness and some type of order with the prayer that maybe God will respond if they can finally get things right. If we can get the covenant in order again, if we can restore proper worship in the temple, if we can kind of get our dot our I's and cross our T's, then maybe something good will finally happen. Again, they're not these terrible people. They're just trying to figure it out as best they can. And they miss some of it, but they're trying. They're trying to do what they've been told. The Sadducees are very, very powerful. They had an incredible amount of power in the day. They're not, it says here, they figure less prominently in our gospel stories, mostly because of their power, they spent more time, and most of their time, in Jerusalem. Jesus doesn't go to Jerusalem a whole lot compared to the amount of time he spends in the surrounding kind of areas. He was very itinerant, right? He's traveling, preaching, north, south, east, west. He goes to Jerusalem a few times, but he doesn't center his ministry there. So he doesn't have as many run-ins with the Sadducees. Why? Because they're very powerful, and typically powerful people camped out in Jerusalem. They controlled the temple system, so they're often very associated, again, it says here with the Sanhedrin, that was the Jewish ruling body made up of different people. So they're very, very powerful. Whereas the Pharisees were concerned with the law and restoring that, the Sadducees were very, very concerned with controlling the temple, because if you control the temple, you control a lot of power, which isn't really how it's supposed to be, but that's how it worked back then. It says even here, the high priests and the chief priests in the New Testament more than likely were often Sadducees. Again, they're in Jerusalem. These are powerful people. Powerful people. They kind of got along with the Pharisees as best they could. They realized that kind of being on the same team was probably best for their political gain and for their kind of ability to thrive as best they could. And then you get the Essenes, and they were separatists. Kind of one of those that I told you earlier, one of those groups that was like, we're not going to Hellenize, we're not going to be kind of invaded by this pagan nation or this pagan rituals, this pagan religion. So they kind of sequester themselves and flee, basically, not flee, but they move out closer to the desert, and they become one of the people known as the Qumran community, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were eventually found. So they are preserving the law. They're preserving tradition. They're preserving information, but they're doing it at a distance, trying to remain holy, trying to remain kosher, trying to remain apart from the influence of this perceived to be evil outside world. Okay? So they separate themselves. They have some really intense apocalyptic, impressions and thoughts about what's going to happen at the end, and we'll process a little bit more about that as we go through. But they have some interesting theology that comes out. Again, page 21, if you flip it over, you get a table, really helpful, very handy, especially as we get into the Gospels. Pharisees, Sadducees, differences, all that stuff. Then you get the Zealots. One of you brought up the Zealots, talking about this sect, this group that was very, very aggressive. Lots of armed rebellion against Rome. They had these knives that they would like carry in their robes, and they were like master assassins, right? So think about like you would wear these robes and like these long flowing garments, and the Zealots would literally be able to, very like Indiana Jones style, like walk up behind you in a crowd and like knife you in the back and just keep walking, and you wouldn't even know what had happened before they're gone. Like they were intense. You didn't want to mess with them. You didn't want to get on their bad side. But they even would kill their own Jewish people if they expected that they were collaborating with Rome. So they were not messing around. Like if they even got a whiff that you might be moving or acting more loyal to Rome than you were to your Jewish identity, you were potentially on the chopping block. They're very, very passionate. Very, very intense. Yes, question. Can we get a microphone? There's one on your table. There you go.
Didn't you say that Iscariot is that a form of Sicarii? Wasn't that in here that you said that Judas Iscariot, the word Iscariot, somehow
I don't think I said that, but it's not incorrect. But I don't think you heard it from me. Whoever told you that,
somebody has said that Judas Iscariot's name was related to and that was like backstabber, like
scholars seem to think that he probably came from that type of family or that type of background. But the Zealots do play a role in the Gospels. They pop up here and there.
But also that specifically Iscariot would lend itself to that he was that he would knife you in the back, and that's so interesting that if Jesus Christ knew that anybody that would know Judas Iscariot's name would have been like, oh, well, he's going to knife somebody in the back.
Yeah, so the Iscariot name, family name type stuff, but probably very associated with this group. Historians seem to think there's a potential for that. But all these groups are just kind of walking around and intermingling in the square and not really speaking to each other or barely tolerating each other or kind of getting along sometimes, and they're all Jews. Right? They're all from this. So again, tension, like just massive amounts of tension. Then you get the Herodians, which we've talked about, ruled as vassals for Rome. And then on page 22, you get the Samaritans. This explains how we come to get this group of people. They obviously lived primarily in Samaria. Imagine that. And so the Samaritans claim that they were actually like the true loyal Israel, like they were the ones who had remained true and had remained pure. And they, and they thought that the Jewish group was actually the bad ones. But they actually set up their own temple. Like they were kind of very, very separate. And the Samaritans and the Jews both viewed each other as the bad guys. They both viewed each other as the less faithful group, the group that had not remained faithful in exile, the group that had intermarried, all that stuff. So that's where we get the Samaritans. We get a lot of, obviously, issues with them. They actually have some different takes on some of the texts, especially things like Ezra. You can read about that there. I'm not going to go into all of it. Read through that in your leisure time. And then last but not least, on page 25, you get the Gentiles, which I think that's one of the ones that we actually are probably most familiar with. Like that term to us feels a little bit more like, yeah, I can kind of get my arms around that. All the non-Jews. Like, great, okay. But you kind of get a little bit of explanation there. Again, just a helpful handout, kind of stick it, maybe fold it up, stick it in the back of your book. Hopefully something that will give you some perspective. As you read through the textbook, as you read through portions of the New Testament, if you come across one of these terms, one of these names, you can even just flip to this and be like, okay, let me get a refresher. Okay, that's what they were about. Also, if you are one of the people, or if you've bought one of those, like the pocket Bible dictionary or the theological terms, words like Pharisee, Sadducee, Essene are in those books. So you can get an even broader kind of concept of that as you begin to dive into the New Testament. Very helpful. If you, even words like Samaritan, words like, I think probably even like leper and stuff like that would be in those Bible dictionaries. So if you bought one of those, great. If you didn't buy one and now you're realizing, oh, I'd kind of like to have one, email me and I can send you the links. They're pretty cheap on Amazon. I think they're like $12, $13. There's a theological terms and then a Bible dictionary. All of these words are in those books with a longer description, even more historical information, helpful hints, helpful kind of things to know so that we don't just go into the New Testament assuming that we already know what these things mean. Because they typically mean more than what we've thought they've meant. Again, Pharisee, for example, y'all, here's a story to illustrate my point. So Houston's First Baptist Church for many, many, many years, as many of you probably know, off and on, about every other year, every 2 years, has done their big Christmas pageant that is just beautiful and just magnificent. The music's great and the costumes are great and it's just very moving. It's very beautiful. So the first half of the Christmas pageant is more built for kids. Like, it's kind of fun. It's like Christmas sing-along music. But then the second half, they get real serious. Like, the lights dim, and like you kind of take a deep breath. And they tell the story of the Bible, basically. They start with a reading. Actually, they have this great guy who actually comes in and in Hebrew recites part of the scroll of Isaiah, and it's beautiful. And then they'd start with the birth of Jesus and go through. And so I have a friend whose husband's on staff over there. And so we go when they do it, and she has 2 kids now. And we're there, and 2 things about this that are just fantastic. We're sitting there, so it's like my friend's husband and her and the 2 kids, and I'm sitting next to the kids, and they're like pre-K, like, maybe even less than that, like little. But they've been in church long enough to kind of have a grasp of things, right? So there's like a market square scene, so you see they have live sheep and goats and monkeys and tiger, they have live animals in this thing. Elephant, they march an elephant through their sanctuary. It's crazy. And so you see the Roman soldiers, and you see people in costumes and garb of the day. And then all of a sudden you see the guys who are dressed like the Pharisees and the Sadducees with black robes and all the things just blinged out. My friend's kid leans over to me and goes, "Are those the bad guys?" Not the Roman soldiers, mind you, those guys. And I was like, was it the black garments or what was it? But she's like, "Are those the bad guys?" And I just laughed. And then the other thing she said that has no bearing on the New Testament in general, but they had sheep and goats, and they have a temple, little scene and all this. And it's there's tons of people on their stage. It's just chaos. It's massive. And they had a monkey. They have crazy, which they had back then, right? So this monkey in a cage is on stage, it's going, and this kid also, my friend's kid leans over to me and she goes, "Are they going to sacrifice the monkey?" And I was like, oh no, baby, they're not going to sacrifice. They're not sacrificing anything on the stage. Like, you're not seeing that. But she was so like in it, like she knew, right? But again, we get this tunnel vision with like the Pharisees and the Sadducees that they're just the bad guys. And they kind of are, but really, I mean, they're doing their best. They miss it, to be sure. And one of the biggest problems that they have, especially when it comes to the Sanhedrin, which was the ruling body, is that the Sanhedrin is really, really in cahoots with Rome. Really, just trying to win Rome's favor so that they get Rome's blessing, they get money from Rome, they can get Rome's protection, they can get all that stuff. And when the people of God begin to be entwined in the governments of the day, it does not go well at any point in the Bible. Like, I cannot say that any clearer. It does not go well. And so the Sanhedrin specifically is really in cahoots with Rome. They're sending messengers back and forth. And of course, especially when Jesus is crucified, that's what's happening. The people of Israel, the Jews, are very, very much in communication with Rome and with Rome's kind of puppet ruler, Pontius Pilate and others, saying, this is what we want. What can you do for us? Okay, we'll do this for you. Like, it's very, very, like, under the table, very messy. It's not like clean cut, like, oh, we don't like this guy. We're going to give him to Rome and see what, like, no, like, they're in communication, like, making this happen. Like, they're moving pieces, kind of probably in a very threatening way, like, if you don't do this, we can't promise there won't be uprisings. And so, of course, Pilate and others are like, we can't have uprisings because then Rome's going to come down on us, so we got to keep the peace. So there's this, like, collusion that's happening. And, of course, that does not go well. So that is a whirlwind. Yes, Frank, can we get him a microphone? Question time.
Sounds like the area is kind of dangerous, even more so than our neighborhoods are.
Yeah.
But when it came to the Gentiles, I didn't see anything on the Decapolis. Do you have anything about what was going on in the middle of the region where you actually had the Gentiles living among the Jews and what that influence was all about?
Yeah, so the Decapolis is like these 10 big cities that were kind of mixed Gentile Jews. Some are more predominantly Gentile, some are more possibly predominantly Jewish, but more so Gentile. Especially in the book of Mark and in the Gospels, Jesus visits these cities and towns and encounters many Gentiles, actually. So it seems to me, especially based on the disciples' reactions to some of that there was still a very big split between the Jews and the Gentiles, even if they were being forced to or just by necessity living in semi-close quarters. You kind of moved where you could and lived where you could and got a job where you could. And especially with Hellenization happening, you have people moving, especially with Rome happening, you have people moving in and out of towns. These towns become big trade ports, especially if they're near the sea. So these aren't specifically, even in Jerusalem is not just Jews, right? But when you get to the Decapolis, these 10 cities kind of around the area, they're very mixed, Jews, Gentiles, and everyone. So the Jews, of course, are trying to remain kosher. They're trying to remain, separate. They're not going to be your pig farmers, for example. The Gentiles are going to do that. They're not going to be doing certain things that are unclean. But you do have these people living in contact with each other, which is really how it's supposed to be. If you read the Old Testament, the Israel is supposed to be God's image bearers and God's kind of representatives to the nation. So not a bad thing, but you definitely end up getting some tension, especially as we get into the book of Acts. You have Peter who can't quite figure out what he's supposed to do. You have Paul who's very much like, Gentiles, yes. And Peter is kind of like, but what? Like, Peter's very confused for a little bit about what exactly he's supposed to do when it comes to the Gentiles. And then he has this really beautiful experience, and he goes into a Gentile person's home. The Jews would have not gone into Gentile homes. They would have not crossed their threshold because that would have made them unclean. But yeah, you have these people living in close contact, which creates tension, but again, is necessary and not necessarily all that strange considering Israel's history for the past several hundred years of being in exile and being other places. They're used to being with other people collectively, but yeah, it definitely creates some problems. Joy, can we get Joy, Mike, and then we'll come back to Catherine.
Is this on?
You're good.
Okay. Okay. This is maybe a dumb question.
They're just
but that's
ask
okay.
away. Like there's
That's
no
okay.
because I guarantee you someone else is wondering it. So you're brave.
Okay, so are the Gentiles pagan worshipers? Are
Sure.
they what?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I never really get clear.
Yeah. So Gentiles kind of a little bit of a broad term. Sometimes we just use it simply to mean non-Jewish people, right? So I think on your handout, it actually says on page 25, it says large numbers of Romans, Greeks, and Persians move into this area and settle there, and all of those are considered Gentiles. Anyone who's not a Jew is considered a Gentile. So Jesus actually goes into pretty close contact with these Gentile communities, but it means a broad thing. It means a lot of different people. Again, this handout uses the examples of Romans, Greeks, and Persians. The Gentiles, I feel, and I could be wrong. If another historian was here, they might correct me, and I would, of course, welcome that. Based on my reading and my research, it seems that the Jews may have had harsher thoughts towards the Gentiles rather than vice versa. There was some anti-Semitism, to be sure, happening with the Gentiles towards the Jews. But it seems to me, specifically, especially since the Jews were very concerned with purification and stuff, that they probably wanted to stay away from the Gentiles more than the Gentiles were concerned with staying away from the Jews, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, Catherine.
Everyone might know this, but I sure don't. I think in my mind, I always assumed that Israel was like Israel, like David's Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm realizing, like, when Jesus came along, that wasn't really what they are talking about.
Yeah.
So my question is, like, if Jerusalem was in Judah, and Jerusalem's the power center,
Mm-hmm.
and when the people returned, it sounds like it was primarily whatever you call Judanites.
Yeah, they kind of settle around, that general kind of area, yeah.
But wasn't it those tribes primarily that went back to Jerusalem, or was it all the tribes that went back to Jerusalem?
It depends on what historian you ask. They kind of trickle back through. It's not like this mass exodus where they're all like, let's link arms and go back to our town, Levi, Zebulun, Judah. They're like, woo, no. It's like, okay, we're kind of like coming back after trauma has happened to us. So they're kind of like, okay. And they kind of figured out. But yeah, it never goes back to what it looked like with David.
So is Jerusalem, though, still primarily like the tribe of Judah and Benjamin? Like, is it still
It's
the
all of them.
kingdom of Judah?
No,
people?
like that's gone. Like all of any type of national identity that Israel had as kingdoms is gone.
No, but as far as the tribes, is it like
They all-
are the other 10 tribes kind of
No.
watered
There's
down?
no more 10 and 2. There's no more split kingdom. They all
Okay.
kind of come back and they're like, hi?
Okay, so
like-
they're all kind of hanging out in Jerusalem.
Yeah, and but again, they're settling around. Jerusalem cannot handle that many people.
Right.
So they're having to settle around, but it never goes back to looking like what it did when David was in power, or even during the split kingdom.
So then when Jesus is up in Nazareth and
Mm-hmm.
Galilee, and I think those are all up, is it considered like less than because it's northern and there's still that prejudice against the
There's
people?
definitely a prejudice, especially when you get comments like, can anything good come from Nazareth? Like, but
is
it's
that
not
just
because
like the country bumpkin, or is that
basically,
like
yeah.
or is that like they live where the 10 kingdoms live?
No,
like,
no, that's so far in the past for
Okay,
them.
so they don't differentiate
No,
that way.
no.
And then is Samaria, so none of these places are their own region anymore. It's all like run by Rome, and people
Yep.
just kind of hang out in the area, and you're
Yep.
like almost like what we think of as counties. Like they
Yeah.
don't really have that
Yeah,
much power.
and if your county was big enough or your area was big enough, you would have a Roman representative in charge. Like you'd have a prefect or a governor or something that would be in charge of those areas. So Rome was really good at using vassal states and of using like prefects and governors and stuff that were loyal to Rome, that Rome would put in power. And then they would kind of run shop for Rome while Caesar was with the Senate. Yeah.
And sorry, so the last part. So after the 70 years of exile, when
Before-
they
yeah, okay.
started trickling back,
Uh-huh.
they put all their, because the North and the South hated each other. Like, I'm just trying to figure out how they decided to be friends again.
Trauma.
So they
Necessity.
just were both like, we were in exile, we're both in exile, so
Yeah,
now
because
we'll
eventually
put it behind
they're
us.
both in exile, right? Because you have Babylon and Persia and Assyria and all this stuff, and eventually they're both in exile. They're both in the exact same boat. And there's not really that animosity between just your average people. So when they come back, that's so far in their past that it's like, we're just trying to get back home to make sure we have a temple and a wall around our capital. Yeah. Okay, so let me kind of give you a little bit of a preview of coming attractions. Next week, Clay will be here, and we're going to jump. We're not going to do the New Testament in order. One, by necessity of teaching time available for the people I wanted to bring in, and two, because I want to jar us out of our familiarity with it a little bit. So Clay is going to come in next week and teach on Romans and Acts. And so he's going to do that, so I'll give you readings from that. But we're going to jump around. We're not going to just go straight through. And then I have another guy who's going to come in. Joey's going to come back and talk to us about Paul in a few weeks. Paul is really his bailiwick, and so he's going to talk about all of the things that we get wrong about Paul, and they are legion. So anyways, Joey's going to come talk to us about Paul, and then towards the end, Clay has been gracious enough to come back, and one of you, I think maybe it was Tom, asked several weeks ago about when we were talking about all the covenants, and how Presbyterians are very into covenants, it's like our thing. But there's this other side of theology that is not so into covenants, but it's called dispensational, the dispensational approach. And there's a lot of questions about what are the differences, what is dispensational theology. So Clay's going to come in and give a very Presbyterian response to that, and but also a good solid theological response to that, and answer some of those questions. And if you have no idea what any of that means, it's okay. It will all become clear, and you'll be like, oh, okay, learned something new, great. So that's kind of preview of coming attractions. So your readings for this coming week that I'll get posted by tomorrow, along with your questions, will focus on Romans and Acts. And that's what I almost said Paul. That's what Clay is going to teach on next week. So two really big books, but we're going to get some overviews and kind of some really good landing points in each of those. So that's where we're at. Again, I know this is a whirlwind. People spend entire semesters just on the intertestamental period. So you got it in an hour and a half. So thanks for hanging in there. Please grab one of those boxes on your way out. If you want to take a sandwich home with you, please do that. If you forgot to bring money tonight, just bring it next week or put it in my box. And until then, I will see you all next week.